The day my stepbrother handed me an eviction notice was the same day I found out my father had been dead for 6 hours. I didn't scream. I didn't cry in front of him. I just stood in the doorway of the house I grew up in, holding a manila envelope with my name typed on it like I was a stranger, and I looked at him, really looked at him, and I thought, he rehearsed this moment. You could tell, the way he leaned against the door frame with his arms crossed, chin slightly up. He'd practiced that pose. Maybe in the mirror. Maybe on his girlfriend. Either way, he was ready for me to fall apart, and I decided right then that I wasn't going to give him that. Dad's gone, he said almost as an afterthought. This morning, the hospital called. Which hospital? I asked. He blinked. That wasn't the response he'd prepared for. St. Anthony's, he said. I nodded. I tucked the envelope under my arm. I walked back to my car. I want to explain something before I go further, because if you've never had a family like mine, the whole thing might sound impossible. My father, his name was Robert, but everyone called him Bobby, remarried when I was 11. His second wife, Donna, had a son from her first marriage. That son was Terrence. Terrence was 14 at the time, already the kind of kid who knew exactly how to be charming in front of adults and exactly how to be something else entirely when no adults were around. By the time I was in high school, he'd learned to play my father beautifully. I was the biological daughter. I was also, apparently, the less convincing salesperson. My father wasn't a bad man. I need to say that clearly, because this story could make him sound like one. He was just tired. He'd worked 30 years in commercial real estate, made a decent amount of money, lost some of it in 2008, built it back slowly. When he got sick, the first time, kidney issues, then the second time, the heart. He wanted peace more than he wanted truth. Donna gave him peace. Terrence gave him no trouble. I was the one who asked questions. I was the one who showed up to appointments and took notes and emailed his cardiologist follow-ups. I was also, apparently, the one who made things complicated. After Donna died, ovarian cancer, 3 years before my dad, the house and most of the liquid assets went into a family trust. My father was the trustee. I assumed, because he'd told me directly, that I was the primary beneficiary. He'd sat it at his kitchen table over coffee on a Tuesday in March. I remember because there was a robin on the windowsill the whole time we talked, and I kept thinking it was going to fly away. And it never did. What I didn't know was that 6 months after that conversation, my father had updated the trust documents. He'd named Terrence as successor trustee. I found that out from a paralegal named Weston at a firm I'd never heard of. On the phone, while sitting in a parking garage because I couldn't make myself drive home yet. Terrence filed paperwork to begin distribution, Weston told me. Given the terms of the amendment, he has authority to— What amendment? I said. Silence. Miss Shelby? He said. And the way he said my name told me everything. Perhaps you should come in and speak with the attorney. I went in. The attorney's name was Gideon, and he had the kind of face that reveals nothing, which is probably why he was an attorney. He showed me the amendment. He showed me the date. He showed me my father's signature. What he could not show me, because apparently no one had thought to ask, was who had been in the room when my father signed it. My father's handwriting had changed after his second cardiac episode. His physical therapist had noted it. His primary care physician had noted it. The signature on that amendment looked off. Not dramatically. Not in a way that screamed forgery, but in a way that felt wrong to me, the way a picture hanging slightly crooked feels wrong. You know before you can explain why. I didn't say any of that to Gideon. I thanked him, took the copies he offered, and left. That night, I stayed at a friend's place. Angie, who has been my best friend since 7th grade, and who immediately made pasta and didn't ask me too many questions. I sat at her kitchen table and went through every document I had, every email my father had sent me, every voicemail I'd saved, every photo on my phone from the last 2 years of his life. That's when I found something I hadn't thought about in months. There was an app on my phone, one of those shared photo album apps, the kind where multiple people can add pictures to the same folder. My dad and I had set it up the summer before his first hospitalization. He wasn't great with technology, but he liked sending me pictures of his garden. After he got sick, I'd helped him set up an iPad so he could video call me without having to fumble with his phone. The iPad, I knew where it was, or I knew where it had been, in the living room, on the side table next to his reading chair, the same chair Terrence had been sitting in when he handed me the eviction notice. I drove back to the house the next morning, early, before Terrence's car was in the driveway. I had a key. I'd had a key for 15 years. I wasn't breaking in. I was walking into the house where my father had lived, and where, 4 days earlier, I had sat beside his bed and read to him from a novel he'd never finished. The iPad wasn't on the side table. I checked the kitchen counter, the bedroom nightstand, the drawer in the hallway where my father kept things he didn't want to lose, batteries, spare keys, the warranty card for a blender he'd owned since 2009. Then I checked the recycling bin in the garage, because my father used to put things there by accident when he was tired. It wasn't there either. I was walking back through the kitchen when I saw it, a black trash bag, knotted at the top, sitting just inside the back door. It was heavy. I untied it. There were things in that bag that made me sit down on the kitchen floor. Not because of what they were worth, because of what they meant. A photo album from my parents' first marriage, my biological mother's handwriting on the captions, a mug I painted for my father at one of those ceramic studios when I was 9, dark blue with yellow stars that said, "World's okayest dad," because I thought it was funny and he'd used it every single morning for 26 years. A stack of birthday cards tied with a rubber band, and at the bottom, under all of it, wrapped in a kitchen towel like it was fragile, the iPad. I sat on that floor for a long time. Then I took the iPad, retied the bag exactly as I'd found it, walked out to my car, and drove away. He hadn't changed the passcode. It was still my birthday. 4 digits, month, and day. I don't know if that was sentimental or just forgetfulness, and I've decided I'd rather not know. I went through the emails first. My father wasn't a meticulous digital person. His inbox was a disaster. Newsletters mixed with medical bills, mixed with forwards from his college roommate. But once I started looking, the pattern emerged quickly. There were 11 emails between my father and Terrence over the last 14 months of his life. Most of them were logistical, scheduling, doctor's appointments. Terrence had offered to drive him to, but there were 3 that were different. The first was from Terrence to my father, sent at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, asking about the trust paperwork we discussed and whether my father had spoken to Gideon yet. My father's reply came the next morning, "I'll think about it more. Not sure it's the right call." The second, 6 weeks later, another email from Terrence. Longer this time, talking about the burden on the family. Talking about how complicated it would be to divide assets with someone who hasn't been as present. That's the phrase he used, hasn't been as present, as if I hadn't driven 40 minutes each way to my father's every chemotherapy appointment for 8 months. The third email was the one that mattered. It was from Donna's personal email account. The account that should have been dormant because Donna had been dead for 3 years. The email was addressed to Gideon's firm. It contained a scanned PDF. The PDF appeared to be a letter from my father authorizing an amendment to the trust, waiving the requirement for independent legal counsel. My father's email address was not CC'd. My father had not sent this email. My father did not have access to Donna's email account, as far as I knew, and even if he had, he would have had no reason to use it. Terrence, however, had managed his mother's digital accounts after she died. I knew this because he'd mentioned it once, casually, while asking if I knew her Netflix password. I photographed every screen. I wrote down every date. I cross-referenced the email timestamps with the dates on the trust amendment. Then I called Angie, told her what I had, and asked her a question I'd been turning over in my mind since the parking garage. Did she still know that forensic accountant who'd helped her firm with the Del Vecchio case? She did. His name was Mr. Favre. He was semi-retired, did occasional consulting, and, this matters, he had testified as an expert witness in 4 probate fraud cases in our state in the last 7 years. We met at a coffee shop. I showed him everything. He looked at it for a long time without saying much. Then he asked me one question. "Do you have the original iPad or screenshots?" "The original," I said. He looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. "Good girl," he said, which normally I would find condescending, but in that moment felt like being handed a lifeline. The date was set. 2 weeks out? I'd retained an attorney. Not Gideon, someone else entirely. A woman named Patricia who had a reputation for being difficult in the best possible way. She filed a motion to pause distribution pending a hearing. Terrence's attorney, same firm as Gideon, which told its own story, pushed back. The judge allowed a 30-day hold. I didn't tell Terrence any of this. This is the part I want to be honest about. I am not a naturally strategic person. I tend to say what I'm thinking. I tend to want things resolved immediately. sitting on information for 2 weeks while Terrence sent me emails about logistics and timeline for the property, and this one made me set my phone down and stare at the ceiling. Grief resources if you need them. That was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But I did it. I just didn't respond. The morning of the hearing, I woke up at 5 a.m. I showered, put on the blazer my father had bought me when I passed the CPA exam 3 years ago. Because yes, I'm a CPA, which is part of why the financial irregularities jumped out at me and drove downtown. I was walking from the parking garage to the courthouse when I realized I'd gone the wrong direction. The hearing was in the civil courts building, not the main courthouse. I backtracked, and that's when I saw him. He was sitting in one of those portable wheelchair seats, the lightweight kind, not a power chair, parked at the curb near a crosswalk. He looked to be in his late 70s. He was dressed impeccably, which struck me because it was 7:40 in the morning. Charcoal blazer, white pocket square. He was looking at his phone with the focused squint of someone who has not yet made peace with touchscreens. The curb cut was about 15 feet to his left. I watched him attempt to navigate toward it, get one wheel stuck on a raised crack in the sidewalk, and stop. I walked over. "Can I help?" He looked up. He had sharp eyes, the kind that make you feel like they're taking stock of you before you finished your sentence. "I'm trying to get to the Hartgrove building," he said. I almost laughed. "I'm going there too," I said. "I have a hearing." He studied me for a moment. "So do I," he said. "Would you mind?" He gestured at the chair. "Not at all," I said. We walked the 2 blocks together. He didn't say much. He asked what floor I needed. I told him the 4th. He said that was his floor as well. In the elevator, he asked, with no particular preamble, "Are you the plaintiff or the defendant?" "Plaintiff," I said. "What kind of case?" "Probate fraud," I said. "My stepbrother forged an amendment to my father's trust." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did you bring documentation?" "Yes." "Original documents or copies?" "Both." "Originals, where I have them." The elevator doors opened. He nodded, as if I'd answered correctly. In the waiting area outside the courtroom, Terrence was already there with his attorney, a man named Fletcher who had the professionally relaxed look of someone billing $500 an hour. Terrence saw me and gave me the same practiced look he'd given me at the door with the eviction notice. Then he saw the man in the wheelchair beside me. I watched the color leave his face. I didn't understand why until later. The hearing began. Patricia presented our evidence methodically. The email chain, the metadata from the iPad showing when the documents had been accessed and by which Apple ID, the handwriting analysis from a specialist she'd retained, the timeline discrepancy that put Terrence in his mother's email account 3 days after the amendment letter was sent. Fletcher objected to the metadata evidence on foundation grounds. The judge allowed it provisionally. It was during the break that Fletcher walked over to Patricia. I watched them talk in the hallway for 4 minutes. Fletcher's professionally relaxed look had become something else. When we resumed, Fletcher addressed the court. He said that in light of new information, his client was prepared to cooperate fully with any investigation. He said this in the careful, drained voice of someone who has just been told something that changed the math entirely. Terrence looked at him, then at me, then at the man in the wheelchair, who had positioned himself in the gallery with the settled patience of someone accustomed to watching things unfold. Patricia leaned over and whispered, "Do you know who that is?" I shook my head. "He's the senior chair of the state's Probate Oversight Commission," she said. "He's also the reason Fletcher's firm lost their certification to handle trust administration in the state 2 years ago." Fletcher recognized him the second he walked in. I looked at the man. He caught me looking and gave me a small, precise nod. I thought about the crack in the sidewalk, the 15 feet between him and the curb cut, the fact that I had turned the wrong way in a parking garage at 7:30 in the morning. I'm not a person who believes in things being arranged. I'm a CPA. I believe in documentation. But I will say this. I stood outside that building afterward in the November air, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I felt something loosen in my chest. The judge issued an immediate freeze on all distributions and opened a formal investigation into the trust amendment and the use of Donna's email account. Patricia filed a separate complaint with the state bar regarding Fletcher's firm's role in processing the amendment without independent verification. Terrence was given 10 days to provide documentation of every financial transaction made from the estate account since my father's death. There had been 7 transactions. The largest was $34,000, transferred to an account in Terrence's girlfriend's name. 2 others were payments to vendors for work done on a property Terrence owned personally, using estate funds to fix his own roof, essentially. The smallest was $1,200 for a service I won't name here, except to say it had nothing to do with my father or his estate. The investigation took 4 months. I won't pretend they were easy months. I was deposed twice. I had to hand over the iPad to the court, which meant losing it, at least temporarily. Patricia had warned me, and I'd made copies of everything, but there was still something painful about watching it go into an evidence bag. It had my dad's saved games on it, his half-finished crossword puzzles, a note app with grocery lists he'd never deleted. In the spring, the court ruled. The amendment was invalidated. The trust reverted to the original terms. As primary beneficiary, I received the family home, which I have since sold because I couldn't live in it, the investment accounts, and the remaining personal property. Terrence was ordered to repay every dollar taken from the estate, with interest plus Patricia's legal fees. Fletcher's firm settled the bar complaint out of court. I don't know the terms. I wasn't party to it. Terrence has not contacted me. I don't expect he will. I went to my father's grave on the first warm day in April, before the ruling, actually, when I still didn't know how it was going to go. I brought coffee, 2 cups, which I realize sounds strange, but my father always made 2 cups even when he was drinking alone, habit from 50 years of marriage between 2 women who both left him, one way or another. I sat on the grass and I talked to him for a while. I told him about the iPad. I told him about the crack in the sidewalk. I told him about the man in the wheelchair and the crosswalk and the 4th floor and the look on Fletcher's face. I told him I wasn't sure if he'd known what Terrence was doing. I told him I thought he probably hadn't. I told him it didn't change anything, that he was still my dad and I was still his daughter, and some things don't get revised, no matter who tries. Before I left, I reached into my bag and put something on the headstone. A dark blue mug, yellow stars. The ceramic was cracked from being in that trash bag, one clean fracture across the handle, but it was still in one piece. I left it there. It felt right. 6 months later, I got a card in the mail. No return address, but the postmark was from the city. Inside, in very careful handwriting, the careful handwriting of someone older, someone used to writing formally, I'm glad the sidewalk had that crack. WH. I know who sent it. I have it on my refrigerator. Some days I look at it and think about what my father used to say, that the people worth knowing are the ones who stop when they don't have to. He was right. He was right about most things. He just didn't always know who was in the room. Now I do. I've thought a lot about what made Terrence think he could get away with it. And honestly, I think it was because he'd been getting away with things his whole life. Small things at first. Credit for work he hadn't done. Sympathy for problems he'd manufactured. Patience from people who should have stopped giving it. Every time someone let it go, every time someone decided the peace wasn't worth disturbing, he got a little more confident. By the time my father was sick and vulnerable, Terrence had 20 years of practice at reading rooms, finding the path of least resistance, and walking straight through it. That's the thing about choices that seem small. They accumulate, not in some abstract, cosmic way. Just in the very ordinary way that behavior becomes habit, and habit becomes character, and character determines what you do when the stakes are real and no one's watching. Terrence made 11 small choices before he made one catastrophic one. Each email, each planted doubt, each quiet redirect, those were all decisions. He decided every time. And I think part of him genuinely believed he deserved what he was taking. That's the version of the story he told himself so many times it had become true to him. I've had to sit with some uncomfortable things too. I've had to ask myself whether I was as present as I believed I was. Whether there were moments I missed because I was busy or tired or just assumed my father knew how much I loved him without me having to say it again. The answer is yes. There were moments. I wasn't perfect. I wasn't always there. But imperfection is not the same as absence, and absence is not the same as not caring. And those distinctions matter, even if Terrence spent months trying to collapse them. What I keep coming back to is a simpler thing. I showed up, not perfectly, not without frustration, not always on time or with the right words. But I showed up for my father's appointments, for his recovery, for the hard conversations he didn't want to have. And when everything fell apart, I showed up for that too. I didn't run from it. I sat on a kitchen floor, and I looked at what was in a trash bag and I let myself feel it, and then I got up. Resilience isn't a personality trait you either have or don't. It's just what happens when you keep deciding that the truth matters more than your comfort. It's a practice. Some days it's exhausting. Most days it looks like nothing more dramatic than not giving up. And intelligence, real intelligence, the kind that actually helps you, isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about knowing what questions to ask. It's about noticing when something feels wrong before you can explain why. It's about a signature that looks slightly off, an email sent from an account that shouldn't exist, a man in a wheelchair 15 feet from a curb cut who just happens to be going to the same floor. I didn't plan any of what happened. I turned the wrong way in a parking garage. That's it. Everything else was just paying attention and being willing to stop. Stopped because I stopped. My father's mug is on a grave because I stopped. Terrence is repaying every dollar because a lot of people, over a long time, finally stopped letting things go. That's not luck. That's just the long arithmetic of how people treat each other, finally coming due.